Hello and welcome to the EFR Presents review of the My Little Pony Friendship is Magic comic Issue 1, The Return of Queen Chrysalis. Before we get started guys, spoiler alert, I will be covering the whole comic here, so if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, go and check it out, and then come on back. My Little Pony comics. You know, when these were first announced, I didn't know what to expect. And can you blame me? Outside of the show, there weren't exactly a lot of things My Little Pony that felt like they had the same level of polish or care put into them. And it didn't help matters that the German My Little Pony magazine had these less than stellar comics published just months prior to the first IDW release. Now, while I love to read, I was never big on comics. But I started hearing some good things about IDW publishing and the team that was working on them. It had to be better than the German comics, right? But how good could I expect? Let's find out. This issue features 6 non-exclusive covers by the artist for the comic, Andy Price, each one featuring a different main 6 character, which together combine to form a giant panorama. But what can you say about them? They're not bad scenes overall, but they really don't tell us much about any of the characters, with the exception of Twilight's books and Pinky's cake. The hand-drawn style for the characters and the coloring technique used makes these feel a lot more like pieces of fan art than the fairly controlled vector-based images we're used to seeing. And I really do mean these feel more like art than part of a comic. There's no title, no real plot hook as far as I can tell. In fact, they're about as unassuming as you can get. Literally all we know, picking it up off a shelf, is it's a comic, and it's got little ponies. We're going into this one blind, people. Flipping to page 1, this is looking pretty good. Like in the show, colors are rich and saturated, shading is delineated well, and the level of detail strikes a good balance between the relatively clean style of the cartoon and defining a new look that's better suited for the medium. I like the use of the trees as a framing mechanism for the page, and the subtle separation of the panels is very visually appealing. First impressions of the style are positive, but I'll get back to this later. Finally, right at the bottom, our title, The Return of Queen Chrysalis. Comic, you had my curiosity, but now you have my attention. Chrysalis is the perfect villain for this comic. She's a strong, menacing character that's been fleshed out enough that fans understand her motivations, letting the comic spend more time building up the story rather than just building up a villain, and her single appearance in the show leaves her nebulous enough to allow the writer the freedom to coax the character in their own direction. It's a smart move, avoiding the risk of creating a new villain that doesn't pan out or resonate with fans, potentially turning off a lot of readers on the very first issue. Our story starts off with the CMC in Fluttershy's backyard, trying to, what else, get their cutie marks. Scootaloo's Indiana Jones garb and the subtle nod to the Sweetie Belle dictionary meme are nice touches, but the gang are quickly captured. I'm not surprised the Cutie Mark Crusaders don't stick around for very long, as the comic is supposed to focus on Twilight and her friends, so the CMC mainly serve as an excuse for the main 6 to confront Chrysalis in the coming issues. However, they do serve another purpose. Near the end, they get established as kind of a Greek chorus, able to comment on the action without directly taking part. Aside from injecting comedy into the story, their presence also allows for scenes with Chrysalis that aren't all monologue, allowing the villain to get more screen time without running the risk of becoming monotonous by the 4th issue. The establishing shot of Ponyville features a nice mix of visual gags and cameos with everyday goings-on. We've got Derpy, Tank, Snowflake, Angel, and pod ponies? Yeah, pod ponies. The plot for this issue is basically your classic zombie movie. Twilight's book even refers to them as infected. And, as with any zombie movie, we have a compulsory scene where the main characters try to pass off as part of the horde. I can definitely see some people being turned off by this premise, and it's certainly not something I would expect to see from the show, but the comic knows it's being goofy and it just tries to have some fun with it. For instance, when the gang reach out to Celestia for help, the comic doesn't invent some excuse like in Magic Duel where she's off in Saddle Arabia. Twilight gets a form letter. You know, Celestia is almost like the transporter in Star Trek, where the writers have to keep coming up with ways to explain why the main characters can't use it as a way to fix their predicament. The big reason I don't mind all these jokes thrown in is that they don't come at the expense of creating strong villains. Now, despite the title, other than a brief mention of the events at the royal wedding, the changelings don't show up until halfway through the comic, and Chrysalis's first appearance is almost the very last scene. But their absence does build some good anticipation for when they finally appear, and I'll take quality over quantity any day, and when our villains are on the page, they have a good presence. And saving Chrysalis's appearance for the end of the issue gives us a great cliffhanger and ups the stakes for the next issue. As for her minions, making their first appearance, we see a pair of changelings capturing Derpy with a trail of muffins. But not to sacrifice strong villains for gags, the comic quickly establishes the changelings as a threat, not a joke. The infected ponies receive a similar treatment, with a gradual build-up from their very subtle presence in the opening splash page until the panels are filled with dazed, zombified ponies, when suddenly the comic pulls a 180 and they become a serious presence rather than a comedic one. The big action set piece for this issue is a showdown with the changelings in the town hall in an epic and hilarious doppelganger-filled 5-page battle. While the first issue could get away without a big action scene, requiring the main six to instead flee from the town to confront Chrysalis, it's satisfying for the main characters to get a small victory here, and resolving the Ponyville subplot means the remaining issues can focus solely on the CMC rescue without the main six seeming like they're abandoning the town for their own interests. Part of what makes this scene so great is that it doesn't hold any punches, literally. The comic strikes a good balance, not being overly violent while not coming across like a cakewalk. Except for the end when Pinky defeats the changelings with cake batter. For a My Little Pony story, this is pretty intense, and breaking things down, it's no wonder. The characters are spot on, with their personalities even feeling a bit amped up from how they are in the show, but not unreasonably so. The writing knows when to take its time and develop a scene, and when to charge forward with the plot, simultaneously juggling both comedic and dramatic moments in a way that sustains an atmosphere of tension while keeping you laughing the whole way through. And the action resolves itself in a satisfying manner, but leaves us on the cusp of a bigger adventure, setting the stage for the next issue. Facial expressions on the characters are frequently exaggerated compared to what we see from the show. Okay, maybe not entirely. I'm looking at you, G3 Pinkie Pie. And overall, it's a much more detailed art style. Transitioning to a medium comprised entirely of static images, devoid of music or even spoken dialogue, we rely entirely on the images to convey characters' emotions or general mood of a scene. The freedom that hand-drawn art provides is used to its fullest, delivering expressions that are punchy and unique to each panel. It prevents the scenes from looking cookie-cutter and helps carry this constant tonal schism of comedy and drama. The layout of the comic is nothing short of masterful, with the story dictating the layout, not being constrained by it. Varied panel sizes and shapes conform to the action, keeping the pages dynamic and interesting. Splash panels establish settings with rich backgrounds, and insert panels help the flow of a scene or transition between continuing action. Every page is wall-to-wall pony, and it just flows so well, never chaotic, perfectly complementing the story and pacing. This comic is a perfect storm of fantastic writing, incredible art, and the insatiable charm of Lauren's characters. The team behind the comic clearly had the freedom to deviate from the show both stylistically and from a narrative aspect, and this was definitely required to maintain the spirit of the show and for the characters to really shine through. Even if comics aren't your cup of tea, I strongly recommend checking this one out. It's just
awesome!